folks, I'm back for your ELA lesson for April 28th. This week we are working on the story Mountain Surviving on Mount Everest. This is a really adventurous, exciting, true story about a man's adventure climbing to the top of Mount Everest, which is a very high, very risky journey to take. Okay, so starting off with your lesson for April 28th, number 1, you were to match the letter of the synonym to the vocabulary word. Tell someone what each word means in your own words. So boys and girls, before you do this, you need to review all the words on the left. These are all the vocabulary words that we went over yesterday in the April 27th lesson. And these words are approached, section, avalanches, increases, equipment, tanks, slopes, altitude, succeed, and halt. Now, I did just a couple of these for you to get you started. If you'll remember, we've been doing a lot of this with the vocabulary for these stories, but a synonym or synonyms are words that mean the same. And of course, they both start with an S. This is something I used to mention to you in class a lot. Antonyms are words that are opposites. So you're basically picking another word that means the same thing as your vocabulary word on the left. And you're going to write the letter of that word that matches. Okay, so let's get started with the first one, approached. The answer here is J. Advance. When you advance, you keep moving to get closer to something. So that means the same thing as approached. Section. The answer is I. Chapter. Now that was a little bit tricky. Typically, when we think of a section, we think of a part of something. But when you think about it, a chapter is part of a book. So that's how those two are related. So the answer for section is I. And then if you skip down here to altitude, the correct answer for that one is F, height. So the altitude is how high something is or the height of it. Okay. And then the next section, boys and girls, is on text features. This story has a lot of text features in it that the author uses to help us gain meaning and understand more about Mount Everest in this journey that Timba goes on. I did fill out some things here for you, but we're going to go back to the story. Now we have covered and reviewed quite a bit about text features this year, but there's a couple things that are in this story, a couple of text features that we haven't discussed a whole lot about, or the name. I think we've discussed it, but more than likely haven't used this name. So I'm going to go through the story with you, and we're going to look at the text features that the author uses. Okay. Of course, this first section, boys and girls, is climbing Mount Everest. And you notice that this is the heading of this section. So we know that before we read that that's what the main idea of this section is going to be about. It's going to have something to do with climbing Mount Everest. Okay. And this goes on to tell us about Timba, Cherie Sherpa, who actually 2 weeks before his 16th birthday decided that he was going to celebrate his birthday by climbing Mount Everest. Now, this was not the first time that he did this. He tried one other time before and didn't make it. As the story goes on, you'll read and find out why he didn't make it. But I thought that it was very interesting that the author gives this fact that Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet high. It says it was the summit or the very top of the mountain is 29,035 feet high, or 8,850 meters. Boy, that is just an unbelievable height, especially for someone to actually climb. Okay. In this section, we have the subheading, What are mountains? Now, boys and girls, if you remember, we have talked about different text structures or techniques that the author uses in their writing to help us to better understand nonfiction text. So this is a question, what are mountains? But below it, so you may think this is a question answer text structure, and it is, but it's also a description. The author here is describing what a mountain looks like. Now, at the bottom, we have a world map. This is an actual text feature. This is to help us to understand where Mount Everest is. And when I zoom in here, we can easily see that Mount Everest is part of the Himalaya Mountains, which is in the continent of Asia. Remember, we live over here in North America, so this is on the other side of the world. This is far away from us. Okay, I really like this world map. It really helps me to understand where where Mount Everest is, where the location in the general area is that the story is referring to. Okay, so this is a text feature. Okay, we also have a text feature here, and boys and girls, this is called a fact box or a sidebar. And I know you're familiar with these. You've seen these in a lot of your books, like especially in the Who Would Win series. There's a lot of these little fact boxes in there. And the fact box relates to the same topic that you're learning about in the story, but it's some other type of information that relates to it. Like, for example, here it says mountains cover 1/4 of Earth's land surface. Well, this information is not in this text, and it doesn't relate exactly to this story, but it's still relevant information. It's on topic. It teaches you a little bit more about that topic of reference, which is very interesting to me because I just learned something new. I know you guys probably remember me saying all the time, we learn something new every day. I was unaware until I read this that mountains cover 1/4 pieces of land. So if you took all of the Earth's land surface, divided it into 4 pieces, mountains would cover 1 out of those 4 pieces. So to me, that was very interesting. That's actually quite a bit. I wouldn't have guessed that mountains covered that much of Earth's land, but it does. Okay, we have another fact box here, another sidebar that actually teaches you information about frostbite. It tells you at the top about how Timba could not, or how the mountain conditions were for Timba and are for anyone who tries to hike up the mountain. But it explains the challenges and why it's hard to climb up the mountain. There is less and less oxygen the higher you go up. And of course, you know that we need plenty of oxygen to be able to breathe. It also explains about how the top section of the mountain is very hard to survive, and you may make it, but you can't survive for long because the hurricane force winds can reach 130 miles per hour. That's extremely strong and pretty much unbearable. And the temperatures at night plummet or go down to negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is far, far below freezing. So that's just extremely cold. But here it tells us about frostbite, what happens. And of course, anybody who travels in the Arctic region or places where it's very cold, they have to make sure that they're dressed very warmly and have extra layers of clothing to try to prevent frostbite. But even being layered with lots of clothing, you can still get frostbite in places like Mount Everest. Okay, why do people climb mountains? This is really interesting, boys and girls. And I know that I believe you have a question that relates to this in your, in one of your lessons for one of the days for this week. It even mentions here that these pages include headings, a caption, and a box fact. That was the fact box I was telling you about. What kinds of information do these text features provide? Boys and girls, without these text features, it would be a little bit harder to understand some of the things that were happening in the story. Here on page 307, we also have a real photograph of some men that tried to climb Mount Everest in 1953. And of course, over here we have a caption. So the photograph and the caption go together. The caption explains what's in the photograph. It says Sir Edmund Hillary left and Tenzing Norgay right show off their survival equipment in 1953. You can even see that back then they also had an oxygen tank to help them as they went higher up the mountain. Okay, this section we know the main idea is going to be about Timba's mistakes. I'm wondering, what mistake did he make? You will learn what mistake he made the first time he tried to climb Mount Everest. Okay, so this is another fact box, boys and girls, but it also is kind of like a diagram. It doesn't point to all the parts of his suit here, but it does give us all the information about his survival equipment. So it actually gives us the name and its definition. Oxygen mask and tank for breathing at the highest altitudes. Ice axe to help climb slopes and break up ice. Climbing ropes, trekking poles, mountain boots, etc. So this is another great text feature that I actually listed on my chart. Okay, and then over here on page 309, we have a fact box here. Sometimes it's even called a sidebar. But for the most part, boys and girls, you'd probably consider this a diagram. This is a diagram of Mount Everest and all of the camps that, the different stages of climbing up the mountain. So the climbers have different places where they camp out, and of course they have to rest and eat. But at these different camps, boys and girls, they stop and they rest for a while, and they give their bodies a chance to adjust to the higher altitude. Of course, you'll learn more about this in the story. So this is a diagram that explains each part of the mountain and at what height they have these different camps. Okay. We have more photographs here to help us, and captions. Another photograph and a fact box here. Okay, thought this was really interesting. It is dangerous for climbers to spend more than 10 minutes at the top of Everest. The body needs to get to a lower altitude where there is more oxygen. So boys and girls, even with oxygen tanks, it's still not enough for them. It's very, very dangerous, very risky to take this journey up the mountain. Okay, and then here at the end, you can tell, of course, that Timba successfully made it to the top of the mountain. He was the youngest person to climb Mount Everest. So that's really cool, really interesting that he made it, and technically was just almost 16 years old. Okay, gives you some more information about the mountains. Another sidebar or fact box here. Okay, then tells you a little bit about where Timba is from. Okay, all right, let's go back to our chart. Okay, so Ms. Clatt went ahead and I filled in some of the text features and the page numbers. Now, you don't have to use all of mine. You may use some different ones also, but I did get you started here with the fact box and the sidebar on page 305. Of course, this was one of the first ones that we looked at. Sorry about that. Okay, so this was the fact box that said mountains cover 1/4 of Earth's land surface. So, of course, I wrote that the purpose was to give another interesting fact about mountains. So, boys and girls, make sure that you tell how this text feature helps the reader. What is the author trying to teach us in that section or through that text feature? Okay. And then number 3, why did Timbo want to reach the top of Mount Everest? Use details from the selection to support your response. I would write Timbo wanted to reach the top of Mount Everest to blank, or he wanted to because blank. So make sure that you use information from the text to support your answer. Then, of course, you will write a brief summary or just a couple of sentences telling the main parts of what you read today. And that's it for today. Tune in tomorrow. See you Wednesday.